And welcome back to the Touchline Talk Show. Thanks so much for tuning in. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of the content I put out every single week. This segment here, I just want to do a, a check-in and give some thoughts on MLS with everything going on in Europe. Haven't been able to talk about the league too much on this show in the last few months. So that is what I'm going to do here before we get into European finals, Champions League, Europa League, Conference League, end of the season, all of that kind of stuff. I thought this was a good opportunity, so here we go. You are looking at the current playoff teams in the Eastern Conference. My goal is to pretty much touch on everybody here and just kind of go through some rapid fire thoughts on what we've seen so far. Starting at the top of Cincinnati. Best team in the league so far. Perfect at home. Not so great on the road. 1 win, 1 loss, 3 draws. Not terrible. It does if this trend continues, it does set up for a really interesting conversation in the postseason, though. Because, well, 2 parts. One, if they continue to drop points on the road, now again, they've only lost once, but they have dropped points in 4 of their 5 road games. Is it enough to win the Shield? And the second part of that is, if it is enough to win the Shield, you're going through what I would argue, if this comes to fruition, will be the most difficult environment to play in the league to win MLS Cup. Because if they win the Supporters' Shield, they will do it on the strength of what they're doing at home. And again, they haven't dropped points. Not only have they not lost, they've been perfect. Will they drop points at some point? Yeah, probably. But it is certainly not out of the question they go undefeated at home. And then you get into this conversation that you've had with the Union a couple times with LAFC, where you don't want to go there. You don't want to have to get into that stadium and that to be the pathway to MLS Cup. Cincinnati is that team right now. And the other part of this is their defense is much, much better, which was expected because it got better once Matt Miazga came last summer, and it's just continued. It's not spectacular, and it doesn't need to be. It is more than good enough to win an MLS Cup with what they have offensively. And they also have this Brenner deal that maybe they can go get another option in attack to replace him, which is a scary thought considering how good they already are. It wasn't particularly inspiring at times against Columbus over the weekend. They looked brilliant at the beginning, and then they let Columbus back into the game. The third goal was a gift, but they found a way. And they've clearly been the best team in the league so far. So the question will be, I was told coming into the season, there's a reason a lot of people had them as one of the top 2 teams in the East. People had them winning the Supporters' Shield. They're validating all of that. The question will be, can they keep this up? And if they can, is it enough to get the Shield? Or at least to win the East so that you get into MLS Cup having to just win home games, because good luck trying to beat them in that stadium. Second right now is Nashville, and then right behind them, the New England Revolution. I'm going to kind of put these 2 teams together because to me, the story is kind of similar. They have bounced back from very odd seasons. You had Nashville with the stadium opening and the weird schedule, and you had New England, moving out designated players, coming off of that terrific Supporters' Shield season, changing goalkeepers. It was just a strange season. New England was just not as bad as their record last season. And I would argue Nashville weren't either. And so now Nashville have gone back to being defensively elite. Hani Mukhtar is as good as any player in this league. And so you have the Nashville that is just consistently in the top, 5 or so in whatever conference they happen to be in. The Revs are interesting because there's part of me that really wants to buy this and go, it's easy to forget how many pieces they have remaining from a team that won the Supporters' Shield in historic fashion. And Jordy Pekovic might be better than Matt Turner. At least you still have one of the top two goalies in the league at the minimum. And also you wonder if this group of players can go replicate what that team did. Because sometimes they leave your head scratching a little bit defensively. Not that they're a bad defensive team by any means. But if Carles Hill isn't operating at MVP level, and if you don't have Adam Buska to consistently score goals, there are some differences between this team and the team of 2 seasons ago. It's still Bruce Arena. They're still very good. He doesn't get enough credit for getting the most out of this group of players, specifically defensively and in the midfield. But I do see them slipping a little bit. To me, they're more like the 5th or 6th best team in the East. But they're off to a good start, and I do throw them kind of in the same category with Nashville. If you want no part of them, and don't put stock into last season. There were weird things going on. This is much closer to who they really are. Behind them is Atlanta. Atlanta has the best attack in terms of goals scored in the league. Atlanta also really struggling defensively. This is kind of what Cincinnati were last season. It's enough to get you into that 4-5 conversation. It very well may be enough to host a playoff game. It is not enough to be an MLS Cup contender unless they can figure this thing out defensively. The attacking pieces have been brilliant. Almada, probably the best player in the league, probably your favorite for MVP. Giakoumakis is scoring goals. They are way better than they were last season. The question is, can they clean things up defensively? Because you can only get so far with the formula they have used to this point. It's still an incredible improvement. You got to give them credit. The fact that they are in this conversation of can they actually be an MLS Cup contender is a credit to how far they've come. They're just not there yet. Right next to them, Philadelphia Union. It's starting to come together. I refuse to lose faith in this team and to lose faith in Jim Curtin. The weird thing is they have not been particularly great at home, which is how they have been so successful these past few seasons. And those early stumbles might cost them a chance to contend for a Supporters' Shield. They're going to have to go on a run. If they're going to give Cincinnati a real challenge. I'm not sure they can go that far. It's not out of the realm of possibility, though. And the other thing is that they've had some dominant wins at home, but they haven't made it look as easy as they did last year, where they were just blowing people out 5-0, it seemed like, every time they played at home. The pieces are the same, it just hasn't looked quite the same. They might be the team, though, that they don't end up as, a top 2 seed, but they're that team you don't want to play in the playoffs because it's all clicking at the right time. Because you know what they can do. They just haven't completely shown it, but they are getting closer. They don't have Open Cup to worry about. They don't have CONCACAF Champions League to worry about. It is all about making up this ground in MLS. And, they're hanging in there even though they lost multiple players to that US U20 World Cup team, including, as Jim Curtin calls him, the best passer on the team, Jack McGlynn. They're hanging in there, though. The question is there another level they can reach? Right behind them, DC United. Awfully, awfully impressed with DC and the job Wayne Rooney has done. Wayne Rooney should be getting serious consideration for MLS Coach of the Year. And Christian Benteke is scoring goals. That's terrific. Just think of where this club was and where this club is now. And it's not just that they're getting results, it's that they look really, really good. They are dynamic. It might not be the biggest names in the world outside of Benteke, but they are They are really, really good. They are slick. They are creative. Awfully impressed. Do they have enough to get to that next level? That's the question. How much can he get out of this team? And since you're seeing what he's doing with this team, how much, can they go get a big summer signing, something like that, to really make this interesting? But to me, they are a playoff team. This is legit, and Wayne Rooney deserves an immense amount of credit. Then you've got Orlando and Charlotte. I'm going to put them together and then talk about Columbus in a minute. To me, they're the teams that have just kind of been better than everybody below them. Although only Montreal has a worse goal difference out of Eastern Conference teams than Charlotte, and Charlotte has the worst defense in the league. So, to a certain extent, there are some major question marks with Charlotte. I do see them as kind of the 9th, 10th best team in the East, sort of where they were last season. You haven't seen a lot of improvement. Now, they have been better on the road, so that's good. And Orlando has been a little bit more impressive. Obviously, one fewer game played, extra point. I feel like these two teams are pretty much where they're going to end up. Orlando is a top 6-7 team in the East. Orlando should be a playoff team. That's pretty much what they have done to this point. And then there's Columbus. I was super high on this team coming into the season. And they're doing that thing again, like they did last season, where you just have no idea how they are where they are. You look at the way they play, the players in the lineup, and here they are in 8th. And it's not exactly the way it played out last season, but the Cincinnati game, perfect example. They just have nothing to offer for 25, 30 minutes. Then all of a sudden they turn it around, they get right back in the game with plenty of time left, and your young goalkeeper makes an awful mistake and you lose 3-2. Wilfried Nancy can talk about performance all he wants, and I'm a big believer in that early in the season. That sometimes the results don't go away, but you gotta get the performances right so that you can eventually it will even out. Except it's just not evening out for this team, and it's too early to conclude that this is going to be another season like last one. But this has got to stop. They are too good to be letting all of these opportunities slip away. And I'm right. The team behind them has a -6 goal differential. Their goal differential is +8. They have the same amount of points. Now Columbus played one fewer games. It defies logic. That is the theme with this team right now. I am super high on this roster. I am super high on Wilfried Nancy. I'm not giving up on it yet. But it's got to start coming together in terms of results. And it's just not yet. Then going down the table, these are your teams currently not in the playoffs. These 6 teams have 3 combined road wins, and none of these teams have more than 1 road win. If you want to know why they are here and the other teams are above them, that's your first clue. I was concerned about NYCFC coming into the season. I still feel the same way. They lost an awful lot, and they just don't scare you the way that they have in past seasons. All the Red Bulls need to do is start scoring goals. Defensively, they've been really good. It's been a mess, obviously, with the managerial change with Van Zier. And a lot of this has to do with injuries, as I talked about when George Stuber got let go. And specifically injuries in attack. So there's plenty of reason to believe they're going to start scoring more goals. And when they do, they will move up this table because they are a top 9 team in the East, 100%. And they made them, the other point I made that I'll reiterate here, they made that move early enough that they can salvage this very easily. It's not a train wreck yet. It's just a slow start, but there are foundational pieces to build on here once they get healthy, once they kind of figure out what they're going to be for the rest of the season. Inter Miami, all over the place again. It's similar to Columbus. It's just becoming a thing. Winning streaks, losing streaks, no consistency. They can trick you into believing at times that they're really, really dangerous and really good, and then other times they look like the worst team in the league. It's never just average results. It's always significant highs followed by major lows. And then you just go back and kind of fluctuate between the two. And that's what you've seen so far this season. Montreal, again, struggles away from home, conceding too many goals. Now, the talent just isn't there. It's that simple. With what they lost last season and with losing Wilfried Nancy on top of that, they're just not, talent-wise, they're not a playoff team. They will have to overachieve if they're going to finish higher than where they are right now. Chicago, too many draws at home, not enough out of your designated players. Again, rostered's not particularly inspiring. It's not shocking to see them here either. And then there's Toronto. I have been preaching since the first game of this season that if they can't figure this out defensively, they are not MLS Cup contenders. I still firmly believe that. It's the same questions I have about Atlanta. You simply cannot win MLS Cup being that bad defensively. That being said, the bigger issue right now is the fact that this team is scoring less than 1 goal a game with Lorenzo Insigne and Federico Bernardeschi in the lineup, and Mark Anthony Kaye, and Jonathan Osorio, and Michael Bradley. And you can go down the list. How is that possible? Oh, and this team is managed by Bob Bradley, by the way, which I have my questions about Bob Bradley in terms of being able to build a team that wins, that plays the way he wants to and wins in a MLS Cup. I've talked about the changes Steve Schwindel has made and the difference that has made for LAFC in terms of winning trophies. But Bob Bradley's team scored goals. And this team isn't. And now you also have these reports that, Insigne doesn't want to play for him. Bernardeschi's coming out here saying we need a plan, which also makes me scratch my head because when does Bob Bradley knows exactly what he wants his team to look like. The fact that Bernardeschi is saying that is a major red flag. And so the bottom line here is this team is too good and this is spending too much money to let another season go to waste. If they can't figure this out, you got to go change managers. Not only is it the easiest solution, also you've invested in your Italian DPs. They're not going anywhere, nor should they. You got to build this around them. Once you make that decision, that's where you're going. And if Insigne doesn't want to play for Bob Bradley and Bob Bradley can't figure out how to work together and change his mind on that and can't communicate clearly for whatever reason what he wants this team to do, you got to make that change before it's too late. Because this has been a train wreck. And I really thought it was going to work better. And it became I jumped off that pretty quickly. Because it just became clear they had the same problems that last season's team had. And that they haven't figured this out yet. And they are running out of time. Moving over to the West. Here are your playoff teams in the Western Conference right now. LAFC, no surprise, up at the top. They haven't been, steamrolling people, racking up points relative to what they might be able to do. But they've only lost once, and they've navigated to the CONCACAF Champions League final. They're doing just fine. Bouanga has become the player that I wasn't entirely convinced they had at the beginning of the season. Of course, you could talk yourself into all of these guys becoming that star. But they lost a guy who scored a goal basically every other game. And Bouanga said, that's me now. He's been terrific. They're deep. You add Aaron Long to the back line. They're just. I still think last year's team was better game to game. That's the part I haven't been convinced by yet. But the winning trophies thing, they have figured out how to navigate knockout tournaments. And that is a scary thought because you know they're always going to have the talent. So maybe it ends in a supporter shield, maybe it doesn't. But they're doing the important thing, which is keeping themselves in position to be set up well heading into MLS Cup, even with everything else that they've had going on so far this season. Then you got the Sounders, kind of hit or miss, dealing with some injuries, only one win in their last 5 games. Jordan Morris was really hot, and then he wasn't. I do think they figure this out eventually. Considering what they've kind of worked themselves back from before, this is nothing. I mean, they're, second in the West. It just hasn't kind of all clicked into gear yet. And it's fair to wonder exactly what the ceiling of this team is. Obviously, they can win MLS Cup, but are they on LAFC's level game to game? Are they on Cincinnati's level? Maybe another team emerges in there, whether that's, New England, Philly, Nashville. Because that's the one thing the Sounders haven't done consistently is show up for, 34 games. It's a good start. There are still some questions. They certainly haven't reached the levels that they want to and have been struggling a little bit lately. Also struggling lately, St. Louis. Although it is worth pointing out they have the same goal difference as LAFC. And this is happening without João Klaus, who is very clearly a very important part of that team. And it also then presents a reason why this is happening that makes you not want to panic about this team. And to believe that they really are one of the 4 best teams in the West. When healthy. They just haven't been healthy recently. And they were always going to take a little bit of a step back from what they were doing at the beginning of the season because it was incredible. But I believe this team is legit. I'm not worried about this stretch. I will get concerned if it doesn't pick up when Klaus comes back. But they seem to have hit on their DPs. And Roman Berkey has also come up with some really big moments. That was a question I had. So far, he's proven me wrong. You hit on your DPs in a kind of jumbled conference that a lot of teams have question marks and there aren't a bunch of teams that terrify you, you're in business with a top 4 seed. And that's where St. Louis find themselves right now. Behind them, FC Dallas, just kind of doing what they're supposed to, carrying over from last season. It's a really good roster. They beat most of the teams they should. Don't necessarily have a lot of success against the teams that are better than them. And so that gets you, 3rd, 4th, 5th in the West, probably a home playoff game. And then you got to hope to pull off the upset and see if you can make a run. That's where they are. Although you'll give them credit for last season, they really took a step forward and they have continued it this season. They have been consistent. Do they have another gear? Because I kind of just feel like they are who they are, and that's a very good team. San Jose. Again, one of your early Manager of the Year candidates. The Earthquakes are in business if they can start performing on the road. They have, so far, been excellent at home, and that's the foundation. If they can just be a little bit better on the road, they are in business. And again, you're looking up and there just aren't that many teams that scare you. They could absolutely finish 5th. Now, you got to keep delivering at home the way that they have been. But to me, this is the surprise improved team that is really that good. That there is nothing fluky about this. Maybe they're not 5th. but I expect them to make the playoffs, and I certainly would not be surprised if they end up kind of where they are right now. Then you got Minnesota United. Just strange. They're winning all these games on the road, not particularly great at home. Now Emmanuel Reynoso is back. They did a great job navigating without him, and I will continue to hold my stance that they're a playoff team without him, a playoff hopeful, and a team that can win the West with him. And they've kept themselves within striking distance, put yourself in position to go get a home game, all that stuff. Now we'll see what it looks like when he gets himself reintegrated. Very weird, messy situation, but it seems to have been resolved. And they got off to a good start, and now you get one of the more dynamic players in the league to provide you even a further boost. Then Vancouver. Step one for Vancouver was achieved, and that is simply avoiding the terrible starts they've had these past couple seasons. Because I think if I remember correctly, they've done this twice in a row now, where they make this run at the end of the season, and you go, well, maybe they figured something out. And then they have to go do it again the next season. This time, they're actually, hanging around in a playoff position. So now if they can build on that, they're really onto something. Or if they can just keep doing what they're doing, they're going to make the playoffs. They've just given themselves too much work to do to really give them a chance to make some noise in the postseason. The fact that they're picking up points and just hanging around gives them an opportunity to change that this season. Now, is the terrible stretch coming at the second half of the season? We'll have to see. But so far, so good. That roster is, I feel like, better than people give it credit for, just because it's not necessarily a team you're paying all that much attention to, and they play on the West Coast, right? They're not LAFC. They're not getting a bunch of high-profile games. But it's a good roster, and you're seeing that so far. Then you got the Timbers. Just go look at the... Oh, I apologize. That should be goals allowed, not goal difference. Sorry. Just go look at the goals allowed. There's not much else to it. They're scoring enough. I mean, they're not scoring an incredible amount of goals, but Evander's chipping in with some. They don't have a big-time number 9. And defensively, same issues as last year. They still haven't figured it out. You're not getting much higher than 7, 8, 9 until that happens. And then Austin, this is really simple. Without MVP level Sebastian Giroussi, they're fine. Playoff hopeful. Not one of the best teams in the West. He wasn't particularly great at the start of the season, which that happens. Then he gets hurt, and they're hanging around. That's the first part of this. Now you got to hope that he clicks back into form and gets really hot when he does come back and kind of carries you up the table the rest of the season. And then your final teams, again, I apologize. This should be goals allowed, not goal difference there on the right side. Houston, also impressed with the Dynamo so far. They are following the formula to make the playoffs. Take care of business at home, pick up some points here, there on the road. If they keep this up, they will make the playoffs. Do I think they will win a game in the postseason? No. But getting back to the playoffs is progress, and that is what you have seen so far. Then you got Real Salt Lake and Colorado. They just haven't particularly done anything well. They're not scoring goals. They're conceding a lot. And then the Rapids are the only team in MLS without a home win. That's a problem. So, RSL have been a playoff team recently. This might just be the season where enough things don't go their way. It's still early. I have higher hopes from them than Colorado. I will say that much. Then, the other final 2 teams here. Kansas City. We're on the verge of this falling apart. Had this really difficult stretch, and they came through it well. They picked up some points, got some wins. now they are in a much better spot. It's still not great, but this is manageable. If they can build on what they just did, they can get themselves back into the playoff conversation. There's plenty of time left. What they had to do was make sure that they didn't kind of excuse themselves from the conversation too early, and they managed to do it. I'm still really high on this roster if it ever kind of comes together. Because the other point I made recently was it's not like all the guys are injured. They're starting to play in these games, and they still weren't getting the results. Now the results are starting to get to come. You got to make up for the really bad start to the season. I'll still say they make the playoffs. I'm not going to back down from my belief in this roster. I feel much better about that, saying that now, though, than I did 3-4 weeks ago. And then there's the Galaxy. Worst defense in the West. And 1 goal in 7 road games. I believe it is 6 consecutive shutouts on the road. Yes, they did beat LAFC and the team that was thrown out onto the field by Steve Cherundolo last night in the Open Cup. Congratulations. Huge confidence boost. Ricky Puig was amazing. Terrific win against, the LAFC backups. You got to build on that. And this is also the very end. I'll throw this out here real quick. The interesting conversation about somebody like Ezra Hendrickson getting fired is a lot of this just comes down to whether the people in charge want to keep a coach or don't. Because you look at what Ezra Hendrickson did, and you look at what Greg Vanney has done. And I just find it hard to justify firing Hendrickson before Vanney. But you can make the case that Greg Vanney has built this, as has Peter Vermeesen to a certain extent, Josh Wolf, and Bob Bradley. Right? They've had time to build this reputation, this pedigree, this goodwill. I'm not saying they should all be fired. I'm just making the point that if this was another coach, he probably would have been gone a long time ago. But this is a super expensive roster, and it's not just one problem either. Like I said, they're conceding way too many goals, and they can't score away from home. It's kind of the same problem Toronto are having. These two teams are in very similar positions, right? High-profile managers, big names, and there's no one thing to point to because they're not good enough defensively and they're not good enough in attack. And you just feel like the whole vibe is bad. And can either of these teams, the Galaxy can more than Toronto, but can either of these teams afford to have an awful season? Or is one of them going to pull the trigger and say, we got to try and do something to change this? I just, just the idea that the Galaxy and Toronto are at the bottom, not just struggling, but at the bottom of their conferences in crisis is what makes this league so fascinating and so entertaining. It's because you just never know. You can have all the big names in the world, and you can look up and it's, your Cincinnati's, who obviously have great players, but not the names. Your Nashville's, your New England's, your St. Louis FC expansion team, your FC Dallas, San Jose are up there near the top of the conferences, and your Galaxy and Toronto are right there at the bottom.